Alrighty, good morning.
Good morning.
It's a fine Wednesday morning. Looks kind of cloudy and dreary, but inside it feels alright. It feels wonderful. Yeah, it's sunshine here in the library. It is. And so we're glad that you joined us for our Wednesday morning Bible study. We are looking at 1 Samuel. Let's begin with prayer. I think that's a really good thing to do right now. Lord, our praise rises to you like sweet incense. We thank you. We thank you for every moment of our life, for every blessing, for every person that we get to encounter, for every little joy that we experience coming through this life. We take this moment to thank you for it. We know that each moment you give us is a gift, that every good and perfect thing comes from you, and so let this moment in time, as we prepare to dive into your word, let us lift to you this just praise and thank you for all that we have. We ask that you enlighten our hearts through your Holy Spirit for what you have to share with us through the study of your word. Help us to see how we can grow to be better believers in you, and also to see more of your character and who you are and who you have been to your people. For all this we ask in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen.
So we, as I mentioned, we are in 1 Samuel. If this is the first time you're joining us, we're in 1 Samuel chapter, I believe we left off at chapter 14.
Yes.
Excellent. It is kind of a closing of one sort of narrative. We've heard a lot about, well, we'll do some review. We heard about Eli. Eli was in a position, wasn't exactly fulfilling that position as best he could, and his sons were negligible, to say the least, in doing what they should do. If we're honest, they're downright awful at their job of priest. So Eli has put in his care a young man named Samuel, who grows to be one of great character, one who does devotedly what God would ask of him in the role that he is placed in as prophet, as priest. And it comes under the responsibility of Samuel, the book's namesake, to appoint a king. The people in Israel, we want a king. God said, I will pick a king for you. As God, I know what is to be done for you, what is best for you. And the people said, we want, like all the little boys and girls on the playground, we want a king. So God gives the people of Israel a king, and Samuel anoints Saul. And so for the past few weeks, we've heard what Saul's up to. And Saul is, in some ways, quite confusingly, he is okay. We see this act that he's done. It's laudable. He's doing a right thing. This seems as though he's seeking to do what is right for the people of Israel. And then with the next breath, we see something else and goes, oh, I had such high hopes. It's very much a give and take relationship with Saul. And unfortunately, we will see more of that today. Yes.
From Saul we learn, while our strengths and abilities make us useful, it is our weaknesses that make us usable.
It's so very poignant, that statement. Yes.
What? Where did that come from?
It seems to be kind of a thought. It seems to be a thought from something that you
From
have.
something I've read.
Yes.
And what did you say?
I said that from Saul, who started out, we thought, a good person.
He was tall, and
Yeah.
a head taller than everyone else, and he
Very
looked.
striking in appearance.
Yes.
But anyway, we learned that through our strengths and abilities make us useful, it is our weaknesses that make us usable.
Yes.
Wow.
And it is reflected so many times in Scripture where it comes to light an individual's weakness, and how God focuses directly in at that. God sends Moses to speak to Pharaoh, and what does Moses say? And he's not a very strong speaker. God's like, well, all the more reason why I'm sending you to speak on behalf of Israel, because in your weakness, you're strong. I mean, that is a trope that it's a trope that we see in Scripture that we often we forget about. That, well, if God can do this with Moses, look how great and powerful Moses, we set him up there and we lower ourselves. Well, what is God doing in my weakness? How is my weaknesses either hindering what God is doing in my life because I am laying into those weaknesses, using my own strength in these weaknesses, or if I'm surrendering that weakness unto the Lord. But Lord, I'm a man of I'm not very good public speaking, so I surrender that to you, and the Lord, uses that. Saul is one who's he's completely keeping to himself his weaknesses, not surrendering them unto the Lord, and seeking God's guidance in that. We see him playing to his strength rather than allowing God to use his weaknesses as his strength. Well, we all have so many great strengths. We're all good at things, but how are they being used unto the Lord? Carol, you were...
It says, if the last chapter shows the folly and effects of unbelief, this chapter shows the wisdom and results of faith. For wherever faith is found, God displays his strength. Thus, the ugliness of unbelief in Saul is contrasted with the beauty of faith in Jonathan. So is unbelief kind of like your weaknesses, maybe?
When we'll spoiler alert, we'll see how that unbelief in Saul, that lacking in a vibrant, real trust in God comes into play. We'll see. Well, what we see is that he's reliant on divination. He's reliant on ritual, and how that and in his mind that's religion. He's not reliant on worship of the one true God. Unfortunately, that is something that it's clear Saul was buying into. It's clear that sometimes we as well can buy into empty ritual as well. I'm participating in religion. Well, we need to first participate in relationship, and as ritual comes naturally from that, that we're getting ahead of ourselves. There's a lot of richness here. We have a good platform, a jumping off point. We understand we've wrapped our minds around Saul, and we see someone new here. We see his son Jonathan, who we will, just by the knowledge, Jonathan and David are close friends much later on. We see, okay, David, man after God's own heart. Jonathan is his best friend. We have an understanding of who we're going to meet moving through these verses, who this Jonathan guy really is.
I need some clarification on Saul, and I hate to appear stupid, but I evidently am. Paul, after he had the experience on the Damascus Road, and was converted to Christianity, then wasn't his name changed to Saul?
Well, he began as Saul, and many times,
but
and this was...
Is this the same Saul, is what I want to
No.
know.
Oh, no.
Okay, see, that's what I needed, because it wasn't...
Saul was, in here it's Hebrew, and so in that case it may very well have been Hebrew or a transliteration from a Greek name, but we know, okay, Saul, king of Israel, and Saul... one who is of fine breeding and Roman citizen in the New Testament. Centuries later, yes.
Yeah.
That when we don't have a clear definition of when he changed his name. Some people say, well, many times Jesus would change name. Simon, I call you Peter. Well, that's not clearly defined, but we do see in the beginning, Saul is holding the coats and that kind of thing. It's not until after his conversion he's referred to as Paul, but it's not at this moment he changed his name. But so it may be that Saul was Hebrew and Paul is the Greek version of that. But I can't help but notice it's not until after conversion. But it isn't the same Saul.
Okay.
So I think that it's notable. Saul is not a very good namesake to follow if we look at Saul. And so if he's looking at, I want to be devoted to the one true God. I want to be devoted to the Messiah that indeed has come. I fought against him. Now I see that he is the Messiah. Well, then I might need to change my name.
Before you start in on that,
yes.
I've always looked at that and said, God sure has a sense of humor. Those people,
indeed.
Those people wanted a king, so he said, okay, here you are, this good-looking man, you can have Saul. He's gonna, and I think sometimes that's the way with us, We say, oh, God, we need this or something,
Mm-hmm.
and he's okay, you can have it, but what's the result,
And we've seen that in perhaps our own kids or other people, and or even in our own life, but I need this. I want this. I have to have this. And when we are given that, and the people of Israel, Samuel warned them. He spelled out in detail what would happen if they were given this king. And they received that, heard it, and still said, we want a king. Your mighty will be taken away. Your cattle will be taken away. You know what kings do. Kings demand tribute, and so that's going to be taken away. All this that you have will be taken away if you get a king. We want a king. Give us a king. And even as we go through, we see fulfillment of the prophecy that Samuel put. How often do we do the same thing? I want this, but God, I need this. I need this. I need this brand spanking new thing in my life. It would make my life so much easier. Lord, I'm in debt. Why have you put me in debt? Because you got this brand spanking new. Anyway, we begin verse 1.
Brought it on yourself.
Exactly, we do. The people of Israel did the same thing, and they received what they asked for. So I guess we need to kind of jump back to 23 of 13. Now a detachment of Philistines had gone out to the pass of Michmash, beginning at verse 1 of chapter 14. One day Jonathan, son of Saul, said to the young man bearing his armor, "Come, let's go over to the Philistine outpost on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Saul was staying on the outskirts of Gibeah, under a pomegranate tree in Migron. With him were about 600 men, among whom was Ahijah, who was wearing an ephod. He was a son of Ichabod's brother Ahitub, son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh. No one was aware that Jonathan had left. Something of note. We see what could just appear as just kind of details, just administrative details. They tried to be as good as they could be in recording these details, but I find something very strange. We have Ahijah, who is wearing an ephod. The ephod was a priestly garment. In some cases, it in the breastplate of the high priest, they would have the umium and thummim. It would bear for those seeing from without. This person is of priestly office. This one's has a very specific role. He is one who is a prophet. He is one who is a priest. He is one who hears from God or works on behalf of God. Further, reinforcing that it's the son of he is descendant from Eli, who was the prophet, whose son Phinehas was a priest who was not a good example. And so we see he is in the prophet and the priestly line that was passed down from generation to generation. So naturally, this one's wearing an ephod. That's good. We have one who is bearing an ephod. Perhaps Saul is, if we just look at it just as that, perhaps Saul's doing the right thing. He has in his number someone who is working towards serving the Lord. But we see how there is a break in that. Phinehas was not a good priest. And we have this person wearing an ephod who has no idea Jonathan has left. There should be an understanding that there is a prophetic ministry in that God would speak through this individual, and it seems this is just, well, you're technically allowed to wear an ephod because your familial line has come through here, so I'm going to bring you along, kind of like as a trophy. We see the seeds of Saul buying into ritual, as he did. Well, I can't wait on Samuel to come. I'm going to do the sacrifice myself.
Well, maybe he thought, though, with all of this,
True.
that God was with him.
Yes.
Hey, look, I've got all this, and so
I am the king whom God chose, because the Samuel guy, he dumped some oil on me. That means I'm the king and God's with me. And I've got this guy with an ephod who's so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so was Eli and Phinehas. We're good to go. I have my lucky charm, and we can go into battle. Yet they have no idea Jonathan has left. Verse 4. On each side of the pass that Jonathan intended to cross to reach the Philistine outpost was a cliff. One was called Bozez, and the other Senna. One cliff stood to the north toward Michmash, the other to the south toward Geba. Jonathan said to his young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go over to the outpost of those uncircumcised fellows. Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few." So we have assent by Jonathan that it is the Lord who will go and defeat them. We will go and we will labor, but it will be the Lord who blesses our efforts. He points out that these Philistine fellows are not a part of the covenant that God has made with Israel. So it is us laboring against those who are outside of the covenant.
What is the significance of the sharp rocks? One facing north and one facing the other direction.
That's an interesting note. I didn't run across that.
I have a footnote that gives some kind of explanation if you want to hear it.
I'd like to hear it because,
It says,
as we said,
okay.
things are in there either completely administratively or there's a
Here's
reason.
an explanation. Faith never lessens nor creates difficulties. Her path is open, very narrow, and made difficult by sharp rocks on either hand.
So
That's the purpose of it.
so so that points out that this is of a difficult pass to come through, running north to south. This is not an easy place, and so but they are continuing to go through. They're not dissuaded. Well, this looks kind of tricky. We're still going to pass through. We're going to go up to that outpost.
Everybody has those difficult cliffs in their life where
Mhm.
the things are maybe not passable for that particular thing. And with Lord's help, and he's saying that with God's help, they're going to conquer these
Or faith. You have to have faith.
old uncircumcised people.
So upon reaching this point in their journey that was difficult, their natural response, Jonathan's response upon his remark to his armor bearer, was to point out the fact that nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. That seems to be at least moving in the right direction as far as where his mind was, where his spirit was. That difficulty has resulted in him not turning to his own strength, but pointing out it is his inability. This is difficult. I need to rely on the Lord. When I think of this, as you talked about, this idea that it is in our weaknesses that we are able to have God glorified through our weakness. I saw an individual do an object lesson with that, and all analogies are flawed. But he filled a cup with a colored balloon, and he was like, "This represents us trying to fill our own strength. And this balloon represents God's ability to work within us." And so he tried to blow a balloon into the other side of the cup, but the other balloon was filled. So if we relinquish this, well, this shows our weakness. We've filled our balloon with our own strength, and there's no room for God to use in that, and he inflated the balloon, and with no air in the other balloon, the balloon representing God's strength filled the cup completely. When we relinquish our weakness, Lord, this is where I am weak. I am not a skilled speaker. It is the Lord that can fill that and encompass and use that weakness in our life. Same thing when we enter these difficult times. Jonathan's first response was, well, the Lord's going to act on our behalf. Perhaps not declaring, Lord, you're going to do this. You're going to act on my behalf. It's perhaps we're encountering this difficulty. We can't do this on our own. We're going to rely on the Lord. The armor bearer responds with, "Do all that you have in mind," his armor bearer said. "Go ahead. I am with you heart and soul." So we have loyalty there. That's good. That's somebody who you want by your side. Jonathan said, "Come then. We will cross over towards the men and let them see us. If they say to us, wait there until we come to you, we will stay where we are and not go up to them. But if they say, come up to us, we will climb up, because that will be our sign that the Lord has given them into our hands." So both of them showed themselves to the Philistine outpost. "Look," said the Philistines, "the Hebrews are crawling out of the holes they're hiding in." The men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan and his armor bearer, "Come up to us and we'll teach you a lesson." So they've received their sign. The And what is the response of the Philistines but pride? Look at these silly Hebrews crawling out of holes. Come here, we'll teach you a lesson. That's not wise protocol in military. To invite the enemy into your camp so that you can show them a thing or two. It's best to, if you have an envoy, it's okay to allow them to approach, but you don't let them in your camp. You say, hold on, and you send your envoy out. They may be close to your camp, but they're not in your camp. They are outside of your fortifications. You have your guards posted, and you have your entreatment outside of the camp. But their pride, they call it, well, it's just two. It's just this guy and his armor bearer. Let's let him in. Let's show him a thing or two. So Jonathan said to his armor bearer, climb up after me. The Lord has given them into the hand of Israel. Jonathan climbed up, using his hands and feet, with his armor bearer right behind him. The Philistines fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer followed and killed behind him. In that first attack, Jonathan and his armor bearer killed some 20 men in an area of about half an acre. They came in, and the Philistines, having such a low opinion of the Hebrews and the Israelites, thought them weak. They came in ready for a fight. They came in and were not to surrender or to defect. Some notations say they probably thought, well, these people see the might of our army, pride, and they're defecting. They'll be on our side. They came in, drew swords, and went at it. Just the two of them. Then panic struck the whole army, those in the camp and the field, and those in the outposts and raiding parties, and the ground shook. It was a panic sent by God. So God's hand was on this attack. It was the reliance in God by Jonathan was well placed, that God was indeed in a part of this. And he sends this panic on the Philistines. Saul's lookout at Gibeah and Benjamin saw the army melting away in all directions. Then Saul said to the men who were there with him, muster the forces and see who has left us. When they did, it was Jonathan and his armor bearer who were not there. It's at this point, when he sees the Philistines in utter turmoil, that he realizes, oh, my son Jonathan and his armor bearer are gone. You're supposed to kind of have an idea of where your forces are and who's there, especially if it's your son. And Saul has no idea. Verse 18, Saul said, Ahijah, bring the ark of God. At that time it was with the Israelites. While Saul was talking to the priest, the tumult in the Philistine camp increased more and more. So Saul said to the priest, withdraw your hand. Now, I have a notation that it could be that bring the ark other places in the Septuagint, not the Septuagint, the Latin. What is that I read? I can't remember, but it was one of these commentaries where it doesn't read ark, it reads ephod, which it would again make sense if we see Saul as being one who's relying on ritual, having the ark there as a lucky charm makes sense. But if it is the ephod, we have the mention of an ephod before. That hey guy with the ephod, you need to come over here because we need you here. And the withdrawing of your hand, withdraw your hand from your ephod. We need you to do your God magic thing, this ritual, this emptiness, this divination, not at all what the Lord has declared you how to utilize and use what God has offered for you, His instruction. No, this is a magic thing that we use with God, so we need to use it here. Complete disrespect. So whether it be the ark, he's not calling on the ark to bring the presence of God into battle. He's not calling upon the one wearing an ephod to use his priestly office to beseech the Lord and offer sacrifice. It is merely just bring this person with the odd or the ephod or the ark over to do his thing. Again, it's an unfortunate use. I don't think Saul has the right idea about these things. But he's tall and strong and looks like a king. Then Saul and all his men assembled and went to the battle. They found the Philistines in total confusion, striking each other with their swords. God has driven them into such a panic that there's friendly fire here. There's the dust is no doubt flung into the air, and they're swinging wildly. They're being overrun. We need to fight. It was two people that caused this. Two people laboring under the knowledge that it is the Lord that goes before. It is the Lord that it is. They didn't strode in there like, we're going to take you down, Philistines. It was the sword of the Lord. It will be God's presence who goes with us. Perhaps, we may come into this camp and be slain. We may come in and be put to death, but we're going to take that step and trust in the Lord in this. And here we are, the Philistines striking each other with their swords. Verse 21. Those Hebrews who had previously been with the Philistines and had gone up with them to their camp went over to the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. When all the Israelites who had hidden in the hill valley of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were on the run, they joined the battle in hot pursuit. So the Lord rescued Israel that day, and the battle moved on beyond Beth-aven. We have a hint, we have a notation that there were indeed Hebrews that went over either by defection or perhaps capture. They were there with the Philistines, and so they join in. They see the complete tumult, and they join in. There are those that we heard before who saw the Philistines coming, and they went and hid in the caves. And they withdrew themselves away and hid. Well, they see what's going on, and they join in. So we have a great increase in number that the Lord uses Jonathan and his armor bearer to bring this sneak attack on the Philistines and completely destroy the force that was there. A very different response than Saul. Saul calls for an ephod because, that's his misunderstanding on how God works in this, and we have Jonathan trusting in the Lord and acting.
But it was God who did the panic.
Indeed.
Not Jonathan.
It wasn't.
It was God who did all this.
Yeah, because I imagine if it was anyone else, let's say it was Saul, Saul would say, it is my might who will, do such and such. Jonathan, perhaps seeing the inaction on his father, the inaction of the army, trusted in the Lord that what the Lord's will was. The Lord had, proclaimed that it's, this land is people of Israel's land. Philistines are coming in.
Jonathan had faith. It says in this great revival, one might say, the children of God who had lost their way completely, going out into the world, now come back to the Lord as a result of Jonathan's faith.
Yeah, he trusted in the Lord. He had faith that God would be there at his own detriment. He didn't rely on his own strength. He put himself in a position where he was at a disadvantage, but trusted in the Lord.
Faith,
Indeed.
Just like David and Goliath, he had the faith he was going to defeat Goliath, and he did.
Another example that aligns with this, we have Saul and the army sitting on its haunches, and we have the action out of faith from Jonathan and his armor bearer, and met with difficulty, met with this, we now need to scale this difficult sharp rocks, we need to pass through this difficult place. His mind went to, the Lord will act on our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord. Nothing can hinder Jonathan and his armor bearer, the mighty warriors. No, it was upon the Lord that their minds were. That it will be the Lord that works through them.
Don't you think that God caused those defectors or prisoners or whatever they were to be there at that time?
I have to imagine. I mean, it doesn't say that specifically, but I have to expect how very uncoincidental it would seem, where you have this mass of Hebrews within the Philistine camp who see the opportunity and take it. And as the Philistines are dispersed, as they're running into the hill country to hide, what they're met with is a force of those who have hidden. That the Lord has turned, if they are defectors, well then their redemption has come in that they can return unto the battle and fight to redeem themselves. Those who hid can then redeem themselves by attacking. Their lapse in trust, in faith, in reason is one again, back by because the Philistines are driven into that same place. You know, it doesn't say it, but we see logically that makes a lot of sense. And elsewhere in Scripture we see, well, if I wanted to do this, I would have wanted this to happen, and it did happen. We have to trust that it is the Lord that laid these plans. God is already where we have yet to go. His plans are far beyond us, and so
it says God, who is almighty, doesn't need the help of anyone. However, he has purposely allowed believers to have a part in his great work, and that great part is faith, and that's found in Romans 10:17. Everything goes back to faith, you know.
Yeah.
And that was what
the Septuagint, that's what it was.
Yeah.
The Septuagint is what I was trying to refer to, not the Pentateuch or anything. The Septuagint, the Hebrew Septuagint names it as an ephod. So you know I'm not just drawing that from the air. Verse 24, we see we'll see kind of a different side here. Now the men of Israel were in distress that day because Saul had bound the people under an oath, saying, "Cursed be any man who eats food before evening comes, before I have avenged myself on my enemies." So none of the troops tasted food. That doesn't seem to be of a very reasonable thing. It seems very, very personal. I don't want any of you to eat. I want you to be driven by hunger to bring about my vengeance. This wasn't a decree by the Lord that they should do this. This is a very personal thing. None of you guys get to eat until I get my vengeance.
Makes
And
it tougher though. Even in football practice, I could remember when
Oh,
boys
yeah.
played football. You don't eat before you play the game because it makes you hungry and meaner.
Yep. You know, and you don't get a water break until I say you get a
That's
water break.
right.
Because when
Yes.
you're thirsty, you're gonna do the play right because you want that water. And so Saul Saul's playing the football coach here and not the king,
Right.
the arbiter of God's will to his people. The entire army entered the woods, and there was honey on the ground. When they went into the woods, they saw the honey oozing out, yet no one put his hand to his mouth because they feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard that his father had bound the people with the oath. So he reached out the end of his staff that was in his hand and dipped it in the honeycomb. He raised his hand to his mouth, and his eyes brightened. Then one of the soldiers told him, "Your father bound the army under a strict oath, saying, 'Cursed be any man who eats food that day.' That's why the men are faint." So he eats a bit, and obviously low blood sugar. He eats some honey, he perks right back up again. We know this now. But why didn't Jonathan know? Because Jonathan was out doing something. He had left the camp, and the Lord saw favor in the actions of Jonathan and blessed that and caused this great victory for them. But the fact of the matter is, King made the men take an oath. Jonathan didn't exactly take it, but the fact was the king had made that decree. And it wasn't that he scooped a big old handful and went full Winnie the Pooh on it. He dipped it. It was just a taste. It was just getting that burst of getting his blood sugar back up. It says his eyes brightened.
Class. That's what it is.
I hope that reference wasn't lost on anybody, but I can't help think of somebody eating honey without thinking Winnie the Pooh.
That's
Yeah.
true.
That poor
Absolutely.
bear
Drops
was.
it all over.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, we're digressing. Verse 29.
No, we're really progressing. You just can't see it yet.
Jonathan said, "My father has made trouble for the country. See how my eyes brighten when I tasted a little of this honey. How much better would it have been if the men had eaten today some of the plunder they took from their enemies? Would not the slaughter of the Philistines have been even greater?" You know, if we had had some food, if you had had some strength, your mind would have been clearer. You would have been able to be more focused on the attack.
That's why we serve and have food at our church.
That's right.
Indeed.
Right.
We need to come right back here to 1 Samuel. Why do churches have so many potlucks?
Yeah.
Because We have our physical needs that we celebrate the Lord can provide for us. That it is not by our own strength, it is by the Lord's provision that we are able to live each day. And over the fellowship of the table,
Such a simple thing.
It's...
This might be why he didn't want them to eat too. It says, in the path of faith there is honey, and in the path of unbelief there's hunger. So he wanted them hungry because hunger was...
Again, we
would
see
be
the off kilter side of Saul, where it's all coming from a personal place. It's not coming from an honest desire to do the Lord's will.
Right.
It is the will of Saul.
Yeah.
They're following after the will of Saul.
Saul was not the one to follow Jonathan.
Put your trust in me. Put your trust in Saul, not put your trust in the Lord.
But Jonathan,
I, Saul, act on behalf of the Lord, and what the Lord decrees I will do. No, it's Saul says this. And to back up what I say, what I want, I have this guy with an ephod on. He looks just like the person that you're used to seeing doing the Lord stuff. Well, he's with me. I hate to throw the word around, but it seems this person he brings people around him that are charlatans, who are merely just wearing a costume.
Exactly.
There's so many. It's such a thin silver line of he could have done so many things in the will of the Lord, and it may have gone wrong, but you could say it was coming from the right place. He was earnestly desiring, because so much of what we do could be from the outside world said that's just empty ritual. Well, no, where it's coming from is not. Well, you say the same prayer every Sunday. That's just rote ritual. Well, no, that's the Lord taught us to pray this, and we memorize it because when we are in church, we say it together as a corporate announcement that we all together pray in one voice that your kingdom come, your will be done.
if
And
you
when
listen to the words of the Lord's Prayer, it encompasses everything that we need.
it doesn't
You're
say
praying.
my Father, it says our Father.
Right.
That we as His church, we as His people, we in one voice announce this, and it covers all
All the needs.
what
All our needs.
our daily bread. That when we sin, that we would be forgiven, and we too would also forgive other people. That we, as forgiven people, we should forgive. That the Lord's kingdom would, and all of this. Well, that's just empty ritual. No, that's a relationship. How many times have you, if you because it wasn't your own words, how many times have you given your spouse a greeting card? Empty ritual. No, you read those words, you go, I feel that. Yes, thank you, and you give that. Just because it's not our own words, extemporaneous prayer doesn't mean that the Lord's Prayer that we say every week is an empty ritual. It's the Lord, His disciples, how should we pray? Well, you should pray like this. You should pray that the Lord's kingdom should come. You should pray, and give thanks for your daily provision. You should give thanks to the Lord, and you should forgive. You should seek forgiveness. It's a framework, and so we say it every week. So we can't go a week without being reminded of how we should pray, and that we say it together. That we don't, Saul, my vengeance. Jonathan, it is the Lord. It takes our minds from us, our prayers from, Lord, give me a Lamborghini. I need a Lamborghini. To, Lord, we thank you for the provision in my life. May those who do not have much, Lord, bless them. May your presence be with them. May your kingdom come. May your will be done. Lord, may my will be done. My will is that I have a Lamborghini. No, may your will be done. And so
You don't find happiness in material things.
you think you can, but you can't.
You can't, not if you're a true believer.
And you desire so much. No, I'll find happiness in this thing. No. You may find momentary relief. You may find momentary happiness, but it's fleeting. It's fleeting. And it's so well reflected as we see, in Saul and Jonathan's life, how it's all very centered where their focus is centered. Jonathan is not getting it all right, and with his father Saul as an example, it's incredible that he's yearning and steering and driving toward the better.
And also in that, his father does have to look at it occasionally. He has to see it, whether he admits it or not, with all those people around him trying to tell him he is God.
Yeah.
That in fact,
He's
looking at his son who is saying, I love you, Daddy, but
You're wrong.
how, and again, staggeringly, we have, again, something else that we look at, well, perhaps we can bring this into our own life. That can we learn something from someone who is younger, someone who we see as less experienced, someone who is a subordinate to us. We find, and so that applies in so many areas of life. We have a father who, as you put, it's not explicitly pointed out, but he has to see this, unless he is going full bore Saul and is just only seeing himself. You have to hope that he is seeing as much of his son to see that how Jonathan is acting is different than how he's acting. How his desires are desiring to be outside of himself. That, what would Yahweh desire from this? What would the Lord want us to do in that? Where did he get this? Where did Jonathan learn this? I have to just say that this is an incredible thing to see that in situations where there is darkness, how light can still come from it, because it is the Lord's will.
That's right.
Well, that's not logical. Well, guess what? The Lord doesn't have to assign himself to our logic. We are the creation. He is the creator. Whatever rules the Lord makes, we need to abide by and say, if it doesn't make sense, guess what? That's because we're an ant looking at an iPhone.
Right.
That we have no concept of understanding in our own little world what God can do. God made light before he ever made the sun. And the only way that we understand light is through the sun. Yet, guess what? Sun was several days later when God said, well, I'm going to make the sun for you. First, I'm going to make light. If that doesn't boggle your mind, I don't know what does. So Jonathan points out that my father has made some real trouble. We should have eaten. And so in verse 31, that day after the Israelites had struck down the Philistines from Michmash to Ajalon, they were exhausted because they hadn't eaten. They were exhausted. They had low blood sugar. How many times have we been cranky because we haven't had a snack? And so we have to imagine that they're just, So I like how verse 32 is worded. They pounced on the plunder, and taking sheep, cattle, and calves, they butchered them on the ground and then ate them together with the blood. Now, verse 33, then someone said to Saul, look, the men are sinning against the Lord by eating meat that has blood in it. Now, without looking forward, what can we think Saul's going to do? Is Saul going to go, oh, I should not have deprived the men of eating? They've resorted to these terrible practices, this animalistic practice of eating the meat in an unrighteous way, and in a downright, and this is a technical term, icky way.
Very technical.
Technical term.
It is. It's quite technical, and so. But let's see how Saul reacts. Maybe Saul can redeem himself and fall on his face before the Lord, because that he as the leader is responsible for this. Yes, they have sinned, but you have broken faith, he said. Roll a large stone over here at once. Then he said, go out among the men and tell them, each of you bring me your cattle and sheep and slaughter them here and eat them. Do not sin against the Lord by eating meat with blood still in it. So everyone brought his ox that night and slaughtered it there. Then Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first time he had done this.
Right.
How long has Saul been king? How long has he had people in his employ by his side wearing ephods, the garment of a priest, of a prophet, of someone who should be in the know? This is the first time he's done this. Saul said, let us go down after the Philistines by night and plunder them till dawn, and let us not leave one of them alive. Do whatever seems best to you, they replied. But the priest said, let us inquire of God here. That sounds very... There's someone there wearing an ephod that has the right mind on them. So Saul asked God, "Shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you give them into Israel's hand?" But God did not answer him that day, as is God's prerogative. God does not have to answer us, because God is God and we are not. Saul therefore said, "Come here, all of you who are leaders of the army, and let us find out what sin we have committed today. As surely as the Lord who rescues Israel lives, even if it lies with my son Jonathan, he must die." But not one of the men said a word. Saul then said to all the Israelites, "You stand over there. I and Jonathan my son will stand over here." "Do what seems best to you," the men replied. It would seem that that is just the go-to response. The armor bearer to Jonathan the prince, "Hey, whatever you want to do, you go right on and do it." Saul asked a question of his army. "That sounds great, King. Whatever you want to do, we will do." I've yet to see something different than that, where they said, "Actually, King, we should probably do this." So his advisor, the priest, says, "Hey, we should inquire of God here." And so thankfully Saul does that. But the rest, it's just do what seems best to you. Saul prayed to the Lord, the God of Israel, "Give me the right answer." I can't read that without kind of stopping and going,
After all that, yeah.
Saul points a finger at God and says, "Give me the right answer." And Jonathan and Saul were taken by lot, and the men were cleared. Saul said, "Cast the lot between me and Jonathan my son." And Jonathan was taken. So God still is working through the lot, or coincidence. We can say either way, but I am struck that God just says, "You know what, guys, this guy, I'm done. But it comes through. "Tell me what you have done." So Jonathan told him, "I merely tasted a little honey with the end of my staff, and now I must die." He's questioning, this seems kind of severe here. Why is it I tasted a little bit of honey? Admits to it, yeah, I tasted honey, and now I need to die? Saul said, "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you do not die, Jonathan." But the men said to Saul, "Should not Jonathan die, he who has brought about this great deliverance in Israel? Never. As surely as the Lord lives, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground, for he did this today with God's help." So the men rescued Jonathan, and he was not put to death. They stand up against the king at this point. They say it was Jonathan who did it, and Jonathan did it with God's help. To slay Jonathan would be to go against what God has done, what God has ordained for us. This victory is from the Lord through Jonathan, and so he shouldn't die for eating honey.
Flesh will always try to kill the spirit. And, here's interesting to me where it says, God forbid. So many of us still use that expression today, God forbid. And it's in here in verse 45 there.
It's as surely as the Lord lives, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground.
God forbid.
God forbid. And then Saul stopped pursuing the Philistines, and they withdrew to their own land. So finally, they withdraw from their assault on the Philistines. This final assault on them was won through the Lord through Jonathan, and it was this based between Jonathan's earnest desire to serve the Lord and follow his will, and in the face of it, if I'm not following God's will, then may come what may, it's on me, but I will endeavor to do what I see as the Lord doing, and if it goes true, if it goes wrong, it's on me. If it goes true, it's the Lord. Then that's how we're going to know. And then we have this empty ritual coming from Saul of just kind of going through the motions. And it comes to this point. Well, it is Saul who has brought this upon them, that they're eating meat like animals, and so he draws lots. Well, God's not talking to us because someone sinned, and the lot points to Jonathan. Well, then, okay, so we know it was Jonathan who ate the honey. He was the one who technically was the one who had done something wrong. I can't say that lot was pointing as Saul thought it would. I think it was a process that brought to light the depravity in Saul, that Saul was willing to slay his own son to make right on his own oath. This oath did not come from God. He did not deserve death because of what the Lord had decreed. He deserved death because of what Saul had decreed. No one can eat until I get my vengeance. It seems Saul had some I problems. It's all about I. I want this. I want that. And he's not seeing things the way he should through God's eyes, through God's lenses, through God, following in God's ways. Because this only sin there was his own in depriving his men from eating and being prepared for battle, from putting the death sentence on his own son for his own decree. You ate honey, you're going to die. And it took the rest of the soldiers saying, Saul, it's your son who sinned against you, not the Lord. You are, and the slow, I wouldn't even say slow, the decline of Saul is drastic, that it's come to this point. We look at Abraham, who went up on the mount with Isaac. He was going to slay his son. And the Lord stopped him and said, no, that you have gone to the uttermost of demonstrating your faith. Here is a lamb. Offer that as a sacrifice. And people look at that and say that's barbaric. But it's like, could we yearn to serve God that strongly, to come to that moment? I look within myself. I couldn't do that. I'd say, Lord, I'm not strong enough for that. I hear you telling me to do that. I cannot do that. And so we have to respect Abraham for doing that, because in our minds we know the Lord would never decree that for us to do. But would we do that? Saul kind of flipped it on his side. Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son Isaac for the Lord. Saul was willing to sacrifice his own son for his own selfish vendetta. And then issues a curse, may God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you do not die, Jonathan. Well, look what you did, Saul. Because God will deal with you severely, because Jonathan has not died, because he shouldn't have been decreed with a death sentence in the first place. We have the closing rest of this chapter kind of points toward some administrative things. After Saul had assumed rule over Israel, he fought against their enemies on every side: Moab, the Ammonites, Edom, the kings of Zobah, and the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he inflicted punishment on them. He fought valiantly and defeated the Amalekites, delivering Israel from the hands of those who had plundered them. So as a warrior, he did fine. He fought against those people. Now, the flip side of that is, well, great. Hey, he's a warrior. He's fighting. But the fact is, Israel is not seeing peace at all. We all know it is God's desire that there be peace. Yet, Saul does what he knows best, is fighting against those around. And then the rest comes with the familial side of Saul's sons: Jonathan, Ishvi, Malchishua. The name of his older daughter was Merab. That of the younger was Michal. His wife's name was Ahinoam, daughter of Ahimaaz. The name of the commander of Saul's army was Abner, son of Ner, and Ner was Saul's uncle. Nepotism. He got his uncle to be a part of the army there. Saul's father Kish, Abner's father Ner were sons of Abiel. In all the days of Saul, there was bitter war with the Philistines, and whenever Saul saw a mighty or brave man, he took him into his service. Samuel said that verbatim. He said, if you get this king, he is going to take your mighty men, and he's going to whisk them away, and they will be in perpetual war. Now, what's so important about having a strong, strapping person in your family is that they could do the labor that is needed for your household. And if all of your nation's mighty people are taken away in war and are killed, well, then you're dealing with a deficit there. You're not going to be able to thrive economically as well. Many nations have witnessed that, and that when it comes to necessity to protect, you have to put yourself in a deficit in order to prepare for the future. But if you are under the impression of what Saul is doing here, where he's just under perpetual war, just warring, this warrior king, he's not benefiting his nation after for so long. He's only putting the nation at a deficit. So we will see the result of all of this silliness that Saul's been up to when we come back next week. Let's close in prayer. Lord, our thanks are to you, that we may dive into your word and see how we might apply it to our own life. See how you have dealt with your people and how we might amend our lives in the daily walk that we have with you to be better believers, to be better people of grace, to be better people of love, to be better people who seek your peace in our life and in the life of others. Help us to live as lights that shine far into the deep darkness that we encounter, so that others may see your light and be rejoiced. It's your name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Good class, Pastor.
Very good.